Welcome to the Writing Westward podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Rensink. Today we have a short conversation with Diné poet Tacey M. Atsitty about her recently published collection of poems entitled Rain Scald. Writing Westward is a production of the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University. In each episode of this podcast, we host a conversation with an author or scholar of new work that explores the North American West. Disciplines will vary, the length of conversations will likely range dramatically, but we hope that each conversation will introduce you to new work, provoke as many questions as they provide answers, and inspire you to learn more about the North American West as a region, as well as its peoples, environments, histories, literature, and so forth. To learn more about the Redd Center, our programming, funding opportunities for research and events, find us at reddcenter.byu.edu. That's reddcenter.byu.edu. Follow Writing Westward on Facebook at Writing Westward Podcast or on Twitter at Writing West. You can find a list of podcast episodes and listen on the Redd Center website and clicking on the Writing Westward Podcast tab at the top of the page. You can also listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and various other podcast networks and distributors. Thanks for listening. Tacey M. Atsitty is Diné, or Navajo, of the Sleep Rock people born for the Tangle people. While she does not present herself as an author of Western poetry per se, her work is perhaps more profoundly grounded in Western landscapes, histories, and traditions than any other work you might pick up, whether native or non-native. If you spend some time with her poetry, you will quickly understand what I mean by this. We are a bit short on time for our conversation today, but the poems she reads and discusses will leave you wanting to explore further. Atsitty is originally from Cove, Arizona and Kirtland, New Mexico. She holds undergraduate degrees from BYU and the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe and an MFA in creative writing from Cornell University. Her first book, Rain Scald, was published in 2018 by the University of New Mexico Press and adds to a large body of published work in poetry and creative writing in multiple collections, journals such as Poetry, Red Ink, Prairie Schooner, Literary Hub, the Kenyon Review, and the American Indian Culture and Research Journal, and many others. Her work has earned her such accolades as the Truman Capote Creative Writing Fellowship, the Corson-Browning Poetry Prize, the Morningstar Creative Writing Award, and the Philip Freund Prize. She currently serves as the Director of Native American Programming and Events at This Is the Place Heritage Park in Salt Lake City. Today we talk about her background, where she comes from, how she approaches her writing, and this new collection of poems she recently published with the University of New Mexico Press, Rain Scald. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast, Tacey. It's a real pleasure to have you here, and I know you've had a very long day here on BYU campus, so I appreciate you squeezing us in here at the end of the day.
Thank you for having me.
I've already described a little bit about you in the introduction, so listeners are kind of aware of what we're going to be talking about today. Kind of the game plan of where I thought we would go is to first talk about you a little bit and your background, talk about your approach to poetry. We're going to have you read a few. You identified a couple that you'd be interested in reading. And then after that, I want to talk about some of the imagery that you use in kind of describing place and landscape.
Okay.
I know you've been interviewed and mentioned in other venues that you don't pitch yourself as a Western poet. You know, you're not a cowboy poet. It's not your not your identity. But I think anyone who hears these poems or picks up your book will immediately zero in on your sense of place and landscape that's very specific to the desert Southwest. So.
Yeah, it's funny you say Western poet, because I think about the West, but I never thought of like cowboy. So what's funny about it too is my dad's a cowboy, so he was a bull rider, and his father was a bareback bronc rider, and so it's funny that you say that, because I always wanted to be a barrel racer, and we just never did. But anyway, yeah, so.
Well, maybe you need to branch out a little bit into some specific cowboy poetry, and then you can maybe vicariously live your bronco riding dreams of your childhood.
Exactly. Well, I was thinking too, today I had a reading earlier here in the library, and, sometimes I feel like I have to kind of say, like, oh, well, sorry I don't write happy poetry, sorry, not sorry, like, this is what it is for me now. And but I was just thinking that maybe that would help me write some happier poetry.
I used to be a songwriter, and I'm not good at writing happy songs. It's kind of just what comes out.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, would you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and kind of your background?
Yeah, so I grew up mostly in the Four Corners in Kirtland, New Mexico. It's in northwestern New Mexico, and it's a border town to the Navajo Nation. I was actually born in Logan. My dad was going to Utah State, but we ended up down in that area. And in Red Valley, Arizona, just over the border. Mm-hmm. And then his family, where I say I'm from, is Cove, Arizona. And it's this tiny little area. It's just kind of nestled in the mountains. Even a lot of Navajos have never heard of it. So they're like, I don't know where that is.
Along the Chuscas, then?
Yeah, just kind of on the
north
end. North end, east side. East side of the Chuscas, on the north end.
Okay.
And so it's just southwest of Shiprock, about 45 minutes. And but mostly grew up in Kirtland, New Mexico, so that border town. And, when you're young, you just live how you live, and that's your normal. And so I went to public school all growing up, and then in high school, my dad told me about this high school in Farmington, New Mexico called Navajo Preparatory School. So I applied and got in there, and that's where I kind of really took off. And I don't know exactly what you want me to jump into, but
that's where you took off as a poet.
No, just even as a person, and everything. So, when you're at the age of a middle school person, I had noticed that, like, I knew I was smart, like intellectual, like I was very capable of getting A's and, everything like that. But I also noticed that there were certain opportunities that weren't afforded to me. And it was about the time I was in 7th or 8th grade where I noticed, like, why am I not in that class? Because I had been with those people, those smart white people, non-native people. I had been with them all growing up in certain classes, and then it got to a point where it was like, oh no, you're not with them anymore, but they're going to go on to this higher course, or courses or classes. And
so the preparatory school kind of reopened some of those opportunities for you?
Yeah, it did. So, I wasn't being held back for, no opportunity was, not afforded to me at Navajo Prep. It was all about me, and I just took advantage of everything.
So did being there in Farmington for high school change how you viewed your hometown area?
Yeah, it kind of did. That was
that's kind of the big city, right?
Well, yeah,
that's what the area.
Town. That's what we call town.
The town, okay.
I'm going to town. Yeah, where are you guys going? We're going to town. That's where we go grocery shopping, whatever. But yeah, that's where it kind of opened up for me, a lot of opportunities. And, like I said, up until then I had been going to public school, so there was, mixed races. But when I went to Navajo Preparatory School, it was mixed tribes. And so we were only Navajo and Pueblo and Apache, mostly Navajo. So I just had a really great time there. Tons of support for everything. I did, it would take me forever to say everything that I did there.
Well, I heard you saying earlier today you did poetry slams, like you traveled around.
I did poetry slams, and I was the editor-in-chief of the yearbook and the newspaper, and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. I went to weekend school. I was geeky. Yeah, I loved that kind of stuff. But American Indian Higher Education Consortium. I played softball, varsity softball, all 4 years, and was on the poetry team. I sang with a powwow group called Morning Light and a Navajo traditional group called Hayos Kas Banatkin, and tons of other stuff.
A busy high schooler.
Yeah.
And then you came here to BYU for your undergrad.
Yep.
So when you arrived here, were you already thinking poetry was your thing?
Well, I think I knew that I loved it because, you know, I had the team that I had in high school. But I thought, well, okay, now I gotta, you know, put my big girl pants on and, you know, I'm going into the world. And so I thought computer science, like that's what you do. That's the big thing coming up. And so, I mean, I was only declared that for maybe like half a semester. And I was like, I don't even like computer science. Yeah. And anyway, so I didn't even end up taking one class. I was like, I like English. I'm just going to study English. And so that's what I did. But the transition coming from Navajo Prep, where I was in a class of 29 students for my graduating class, to, I can't even remember what the numbers are here or what they were about 20 years ago.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, at least 30,000, I think.
Yeah.
You know, it was definitely culture shock, and but I had gotten into writing some more. Like, you know, I knew it was something that I wanted to do while I was here, so I took classes from Scott Hatch and Jim Barnes, and Jim Barnes was a visiting professor. He's Choctaw descent, and I'm trying to remember what other writing classes I took, but I also remember Lance Larson's short story. That one really stood out for me, and some other classes here.
And then you went to Cornell for an MFA?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, so... but
that was at that point specifically to write.
Right. So when I was at BYU, one of my professors, Fred Pinniger, he was like an honors class for my freshman writing course. And he was the one who introduced what an MFA was to me and what I could do with writing. And so when I left here, I had studied English, but I knew my writing was kind of you know. But I had gone to Taiwan after I graduated, and I taught English there for a year. And then I thought, well, I want to get ready for graduate school. But I knew, like I said, my writing wasn't great. So I had always wanted to attend the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. And so I decided to go there just to prepare my portfolio for my MFA application. So that's what I did. After Taiwan, I moved to Santa Fe. I started taking classes, and man, that place is special. That's like a really special, amazing place. I can't say enough good about it. And just really fostered my writing, and, you know, because I had to take all genres of it, and I really enjoyed that. But I still loved poetry, and so, yeah, from there, I went on to get my MFA at Cornell in Ithaca, New York, in creative writing with my concentration in poetry.
And that's where some of these poems from Rain Scald kind of have their genesis, right?
Most of them.
Most all of them.
If not all of them.
Period.
Yep.
Let's talk about this collection. You have it divided into 3 parts. I think the ones we're reading are all from part 3, but do you want to just kind of give us the thumbnail of what the 3 parts are?
Yeah. So the first part is called Sayit, and the second is Gorge Dweller, the third is Tkohe. And Sayit, Seh means rock, and Yet or Yeet means inside of. And so it means canyon, essentially, or deep inside the rock. And so I'll let that metaphor stand on its own. And so those stories or those poems there are what I deem as deep inside the rock. And Gorge Dweller is mostly centered on the location in Ithaca, New York, in the gorges that Cornell sits on and surrounding gorges in the area, and how I came to find solace in the gorges. One of the things that I had a hard time with when I was in New York was not being able to see the sunrise and see the sunset, and almost even the sky, for that matter. Like, I would hike and hike and hike, and as high as I would get, I still couldn't see the land. It was just trees, and that was really hard for me. So I went to the gorges, and they kind of opened up for me and made living bearable sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also the unfortunate events where there were some suicides that had happened when I was there. And these poems in Gorge Dweller explore those deaths and kind of how I processed them. And so Twohe, the third, Twohe is an extinct Navajo ceremony, and it's used for calling the rain, healing paralysis, resuscitating from drowning and deafness, and handling dreams. And so a lot of the pieces in that section have to do with other experiences that call for ceremony in those ways.
Well, why don't we have you read, the one I definitely want to get to was In Strips,
Mm-hmm.
which is, people will have to look this up or pick up the book to see how this is arranged, because there's kind of a visual element here as well that won't come across through the reading. But do you want to go ahead and read this for us and then maybe talk about it a little bit? Or maybe we'll do another one right afterwards.
Sure. In Strips. 1. Fingertip need. Neck. Stitch issue. Sentence tear. This rick-rack struggle. Line by blossom. Rest on fault. In the spread. Wrap. Sat on. My wrist. The roundup. Crosswire threads. Warp and weft effect. When we gather, muscle like crevice, bless us upstitch, song, yeah, nose of mountain, color, yeah, or ugly. 2. Bark, take care, language we use, push it around, or beyond that, gather the hip, or wrinkle, rub flour, or compass, or smear nickels into clavicle, pick moments, settle into letters, clip them, break, rick-rack, word at the bottom, these are elbows, says, either page, jeans, over the eye, like stars, skin, quilt, look up. 3. Let me respond, stick, out our ribs, tearing course, private as armpit, I am sorry, say that again, sip, where the skin gathers, let me swing, storytell, of land, keeps in our strife, pass by pass, know there's infant, within the rocks, within the guts, lava rock is not lava, rock but blood, know of monsters, leap in all, fury from ridge to fall, water trace, forehead, nose, chin to breasts, tummy to knees. 4. But this is not a mountain, is seam rip, seam, stress on the fold, is not a gorge, a line, is walls in backstitch, bark of wrinkle, what binds the raw edge, the sashing and piecing of built up or collapse, of create, applique, hills to sky, land. All together words like clouds, sentence like mountain sack, gone with the grain in strides of bark.
I don't know if this is the way your interviewers always react, but your words elicit a lot of emotions in me and a lot of feelings, but I have yet to be able to put my finger on what the emotion is or what the feeling is, which makes me want to go back and read it again. Not that your poetry is mysterious, but it's powerful, but I can't grasp quite why.
Just in this one poem, or
in lots of them.
Oh, okay.
Some of them are more explicit, where I can see what's going on.
Yeah.
But there's a power in your imagery and words. One thing I'm really interested in this one is this kind of relationship between how you talk about kind of corporal, like bodies, right, and then how you talk about land and rock and geology. When you go home to Cove or these other places and you're driving around and you look at the scenery and the landscape and the mountains and the canyons, do you think that you are looking at them more differently than other people are?
I think for sure, like absolutely. So land for me, it holds stories. So every time I see a rock formation, like when I go home, I know stories about that land formation, and those stories are triggered by going home, and so I tell myself those stories or remember them being told to me. There was a story in Prairie Schooner that was published called "To the Whirlwinds," and there's a formation out in Red Valley, right just east of Cove, and it's said to be like the thumb of one of the monsters that lived in the area. And so, just that land formation evokes creation, invokes, all of those things for me, and wonder about the narration, the narrative of that monster and how his hand came to be there, and all of these things, and in that story "To the Whirlwinds," it's a fictional / nonfiction piece where I create memories of what it was like when my dad got the news that my mother had was in a horrific car accident where she ended up passing away, where he's taking his runners around them, around that rock formation. He's running, and so there are places all over Cove and home where you've heard stories like, oh, there was a family, and this is when they had horses and wagons and before automobiles came, and they had a sick baby and they were trying to make it to the hospital and shiprock and didn't make it in time, and so they had to bury their baby right there
over in this spot.
Yeah, and so all these areas, they hold these stories for you, and for me that creates a kinship and a closeness to the land, and it's very personal and intimate for me for that reason.
I've driven around the Four Corners a lot, and it's one of my favorite regions, and from when I was in my early 20s and I kind of started exploring that area, and I've always had this sense as I was looking out over this. I grew up in Northwest Washington, right? So this is like a very foreign, very strange landscape. And what just made me so kind of obsessed with the area was this sense that there was something in the landscape, that there was something important there. There was something to be known. And I didn't know what it was, but it gave it kind of this allure and made me just so curious about the area. And I think maybe you're hinting at maybe what I was feeling is that there are stories, not just yours, but stories of so many different families and peoples that are embedded in centuries and centuries of this landscape. And I don't know, maybe that gets out to some of us observers who are, outsiders driving through. We feel that perhaps. What about when you're in other places in the desert Southwest where you don't have a personal history, but there's these similar kind of red rock landscapes? Do you project on them stories and ideas?
Not often. No.
So for you, it's really specific to those places where you grew up.
Yeah, And part of that too for me is respect. So when I was living in Santa Fe, I was having this really hard time. One time, I don't remember what it was I was struggling with, but I knew that was Pueblo land, mm-hmm. And I felt a kinship, but not a strong connection. Like I knew that wasn't quote unquote my land, and I had to drive home and drive to Cove and just be, and even here, like I try to always be respectful of like Ute and Goshu and Northwestern Banner Shoshone. And I wonder about their stories, but I don't often project, just because I think personally it's disrespectful to write those. But
well, it makes me think of, I don't know if you've read Jared Farmer's book. It's actually on the bookshelf right behind you, called On Zion's Mount. But it's all kind of about how white settlers here in Utah County projected kind of, well, one of the points he's making is how they projected kind of these made-up native stories on Mount Timpanogos, right? And they kind of invented a history and projected it on the landscape, which is something that I don't think. We all create our own histories and our own connections and relationships with the land.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about the West in general and land in general, and tribes moved around. We haven't always been here. We have always been here, and we haven't always been here, if that makes any sense. It's winter time now, so I can talk freely about creation stories for Diné. But, we've moved through different worlds, and so that's what I say when I say we haven't always been here.
The fourth?
Some people believe we're in the fourth world, and some Diné believe we're in the fifth world. So, and we might not always be here. So I think about that too. I think about not just tribes in the past, some 100,000 years, but even before that, and what the land does hold. But I think that either way, it's sacred. Like I'm just a big believer that, and it's funny, not funny, but like the earth is our mother. Like she provides for us everything that we need. And it seems cliche, but it's not cliche. Yeah, but
that's what you mean by funny.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I mean. And I don't want to seem cliche, but when it comes down to it, like everything that we have is from the earth. And so I feel like, how could a mother leave her children? Like she can't. She's always with us. So
I want to have you read at least one more. I've started a couple kind of desert Southwest projects because I want an excuse to go wander around the desert Southwest more. But one thing that really fascinates me about the landscape is how it's often defined by the absence of water, right? It's dry, it's a desert, there's not water there. Yeah. But yet the land formations themselves quite often are defined by water, right? They were carved out by water. And I'm really fascinated by this kind of paradoxical relationship between desert rock and canyon and water. And your book is called Rain Scald, and water and rain and clouds come up a lot in a lot of your poems. I was wondering if you could read this one, Leaping Ridge, for us.
Yeah.
Maybe this poem doesn't get at it like you think perhaps the other one does, but if you could talk kind of about water a little bit.
Okay. Leaping Ridge. The crescent tells of a night that once poured pale tiles out of the sky, a pale tilt, whoosh. Night blooms from Spanish dagger, soars of water and ash. There is no smoke spilt or stitches along fibers, land to blue. Wall where water carves a tear, a wilted pluck or flower canal. Gourdful spew at the tongue. Watch how a sheer quilt freezes in patch, in dune. Smother, rock fold once cradled a mother in the hilt, dipped her in descent, yucca curl. Last gawk went in search of her back, where after the jolt her infant swayed. At every crumb, at every crumble of limb and mud, such a small thud, thud, thud. I didn't realize there was so much water in that. That's funny. So this poem is about a formation in Cove, and I think we called it Leaping Ridge growing up, but I think it's more like translate to Scooting Ridge or something like that. And it has this whole huge story, and I don't know if you want to hear the story because it doesn't have much to do with rain, but essentially
maybe give us the
rundown version. Yeah. Essentially, I believe it was some Mexican soldiers had come up, and the Navajos knew that they were going to be attacked, so they ran up to this hard to get to plateau-ish area. And Mexicans tried to come one way and the other, then it didn't work, and then they came up at night and they massacred the people up there. And there was a story about a woman who had been given a rope to tie around herself and her baby to kind of come down this like slit crevice and be lowered down, and she put it on wrong and ended up killing herself and her baby. So that's the history of this, but in terms of, water and rain and what once was, right? So we hear the stories often from our grandparents and great-grandparents who tell stories of rain, like there always used to be rain and things were green, and the plants that they planted always had enough water to grow. And irrigation, there wasn't too much irrigation going on in their time. But now we're to a point where we, get extremely low amounts of rainfall. And so irrigation is necessary, and farming now is, we don't do it as much, I think, anymore. It's something that we've lost as times have gone on. But there is that idea when I juxtapose my time spent in New York, where we got tons of water and tons of rain, to the canyons and the land in New Mexico and Arizona, there is a very stark difference in land. And so when I think of rain, I also think of the stories that we tell in our creation in the second world, when Coyote stole Water Monster's baby, and no one knew Coyote had Water Monster's baby under his robe until the waters started rising and flooding the earth because Water Monster was looking for her baby. And so there's all of that in here. Mm-hmm. Those poems are also in here. And then what it means to get too much rain, right? Too much water. What does that, what does that mean? And rain scald, the term, is also called rain rot, and it's kind of this skin disease for horses, and when they get too much water and it like mats and their hair kind of falls off and it looks really patchy and ugly and gross.
It's interesting because rain, in so many traditions, rain and water is life and it's renewal, and it's you're kind of exploring in some ways some of the inverse. It's what was past and is no more, or there's danger, right, in too much. Yeah.
So there's all of that, and I mean even the cover, and this is why Cara Romero is a wonderful photographer, and this piece on the cover is I think it's just gorgeous. But it really captured, that thought of what it means to have too much water. Even when there is a time when we need water. So.
Well, we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to kind of ask one last kind of perhaps weird question. When I think about language, and in the desert Southwest. There's specifically poetry, right? Because it's language, but it's also symbolism and it's imagery. And, what kind of comes to my mind immediately is, the prevalence of petroglyphs and pictographs and, these images or forms of language, that people's etched into the earth, right? And thousands of years later, we view them. And I don't think you probably view your poetry as you etching, or inscribing your language and imagery and stuff into the earth. But do you see any relationship there, or in how you? I mean, when you go to these sites and you see these things, do you feel a kinship? Do you feel a connection there, as you also are by profession kind of involved in recording ideas and feelings and preserving them?
Yeah. I've never really thought about it that way, but when you started talking about petroglyphs and things like that, it does make sense, because those are stories that they're telling and things that are notable, that are happening to their people, and I feel like, yes, there is right now for our people. We're in drought, metaphorically and literally.
Literally.
And we have cause to look to ceremony, right? There is, as a society, as a people and even individual, like, we need healing, and we need, it's just something that we stand in need of right now. And
you mean Diné and America,
yeah,
more broadly?
Yeah, Diné and America.
So how would you hope that, some random white guy like me, would get from picking up this book versus what you would hope that someone maybe from your own community or from Cove would what kind of experiences you hoping people will have with your work?
So emotion, like, I feel like you said, you were like, I feel these emotions, but I'm not sure, like, can't pinpoint exactly, and especially in strips, the poem that I read earlier, that is meant to be disjunctive, that is meant to be a whole bunch of different parts kind of scrambled, and but I'm hoping that the emotion is still there, because for me, in this book and in my writing right now, emotion is everything, and I focus on emotion because it's the human experience, right? So just, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, we all feel loss, and we all feel different emotions. And I think that in that way, I'm hoping someone who's non-Navajo or non-Native can pick this up and say, oh, okay, like, I feel something that the writer has felt, but also that this is the same, that I have felt this too. And in that, kind of close a gap between peoples.
It opens our feeling anything, like, kind of opens our hearts up, allows us to connect with other people, and to, even if we don't understand why or how, right?
Yeah.
I often, I spend a lot of time in the outdoors, and one of the big reasons is because when I'm, up on the top of a mountain, I feel something, and it makes me feel more human. It also makes me feel, as a human, that I'm connected to something bigger, and I think the best art, hopefully, should do the same thing, and I think your poetry definitely does. I don't know if that's what you were aiming at, but that's what it's done for me. Well, I want to let you get back home. I know it's been a really long day. Do you have any kind of last parting words?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tacey. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this podcast. Writing Westward is a production of the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University. I'm Brendan Rensink, and I serve here as the host, producer, and engineer, and pretty much everything else of the podcast. So if you have any praise or critique, I guess you can probably send it my way. I also serve here at the Redd Center as the assistant director and as an assistant professor in the Department of History. So please contact me if you have any questions, not just about the podcast, but about the Redd Center, our events, our funding, or anything else. Our theme music was provided by local Utah composer Micah Dahl Anderson. You can find him at micahdahl.anderson.com. That's Micah, D-A-H-L, Anderson with an O.com. I'll go ahead and include a link in the episode description. If you live here in the Intermountain West, let me also mention our digital public history project, Intermountain Histories. You can visit it at intermountainhistories.org or download the free mobile app by searching for Intermountain Histories on your Apple or Android devices. With this website and free mobile app, you can explore and read carefully curated histories of the region, complete with archival photos, bibliographies, and more. Each is researched and written by students and professors at universities around the region. Otherwise, please subscribe to the podcast or follow us on Facebook or Twitter to receive notification when the next episode goes live. We have many more fascinating conversations on the horizon and hope that you'll join us.